Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. The tasty fruits that we will delve into today may not be too familiar to you, especially if you live west of the Rocky Mountains. However, in the Midwest, East, and the South, pawpaws and native persimmons are a taste treat. You've probably never even seen a pawpaw in a grocery store in the West. And yes, out here we are familiar with Japanese persimmons, but Native American persimmons? Probably not. Master gardener and international gardening expert Quentyn Young tells us about growing and pruning pawpaws and native persimmons that can be grown throughout the United States. From Dave Wilson Nursery, Phil Pursel says the best fruit, vine, and berry deals are coming soon to a nursery near you. In the West, they're probably already there. We're talking bare root fruit trees, vines, berries, and more, available now as rather barren-looking sticks that might be in small pots ready for planting, and their price is at the lowest of the year. But how do you plant and care for them? We'll chat with Phil Pursel. He has the tips. And our favorite retired college horticultural professor, Debbie Flower, has a warning for you. If you're thinking of applying a frost protectant spray to your cold-sensitive plants before temperatures drop below 32 degrees, think again. So before you reach for that spray bottle, listen to what Debbie has to say. She has some alternatives for protecting your plants from the cold. We're podcasting from Barking Dog Studios here in the beautiful Abutilon jungle in suburban Purgatory. It's the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, brought to you today by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Let's go. We like to answer your garden questions here on the Garden Basics podcast, and we get a question via a first-time source, Substack, which is a newsletter program that a lot of people write on and also have podcasts on. And we get a question from Lisa Burnett, who writes Brunette Gardens on a Substack. And she writes in and says, following a recommendation, last year I pruned my native persimmons and pawpaws to harvest height, treating them like orchard trees. This seemed like a colossally bad move, judging by how they've responded. The pawpaw is dead, though it did send runners out all around the mane. The persimmon looked dicey all winter, but came back this past year, though it's now sending shoots off the top because of being topped off. I feel terrible about this and wish I had not listened to the advice. Should I just let these trees heal themselves at this point? I have removed the broken branches from the persimmon, mainly from raccoons getting at the fruit, but have otherwise let it be. Thanks in advance for your input. Well, thank you, Lisa, for that question. Let's bring in somebody who knows something about pawpaws and native persimmons. It would be Sacramento County Master Gardener Quentyn Young. He has lived everywhere, so he knows about a lot of interesting fruit varieties, and he's attempting to grow a lot of interesting fruit varieties, including at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center. And Q, one of your experiments at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center in the orchard area is pawpaws. What exactly is a pawpaw?
So pawpaws are one of the last native custard apples who are native to the eastern U.S. There's quite a few that are native to Central and South America, but the pawpaws are the last ones that are native to the northeast of the United States.
And I guess they do fairly well along the entire East Coast. But reading about it, it seems like they would do well here in California, too, because it says it's hardy from USDA zones 5 through 10.
They are. They do well here. The trick that here is afternoon shade. They don't like our hot, dry summers.
Ah, yes. And that is the true weakness of the USDA zone plant hardiness maps is what it primarily measures is how cold it gets in particular zones.
Exactly. And they're usually on the East Coast. They're almost always an understory tree, and we forget how humid it is on the East. So if you're going to grow them here, give them definitely some afternoon shade. And they do like regular water, and they do like really rich soil.
What is the eventual height of a pawpaw? Is it a tree, or is it a shrub, or is it a vine?
No, it is a tree. I guess you could call it a multi-trunk shrub as well. They do form thickets, so they do send up suckers or runners. I would give them maybe in the 8 to 10 foot range. They're going to look, they give your garden a really nice tropical look. They'll look somewhat like a papaya or avocado, but the leaves do burn, and ours burn at the Hort Center every year, and I think I will have to eventually find a new location for them.
Sounds like they would like shade here.
Yeah, definitely PM shade.
Can you plant them from seed?
You can grow them from seed, but you do need two different varieties to get cross-pollination. So we have two named varieties at the Hort Center, Shenandoah and Susquehanna. There's quite a few named varieties available on the retail market. You can buy seedling-grown ones as well, and they tend to be true to their parent. So that's a good way to start them.
If they're true to their parent, then I guess that would mean that they might take from cuttings as well.
You could do cuttings. I'm not sure how well they root, and I've never seen pawpaws grafted. My understanding is grafting tends to weaken them. They tend to be better as seedling grown.
Okay, but what about just taking some branches off, either hardwood or semi-hardwood, and starting them in soil?
I would say definitely give them a shot. I would try them maybe a couple different ways, maybe air layering, maybe taking cuttings, that sort of thing.
The fruit of the pawpaw sounds very interesting. It's described as, first of all, being very nutritious, but with a strong aroma and a flavor that resembles banana, mango, and pineapple. And it's a rather big piece of fruit, too. It's like 2 pounds.
Yeah, they are they're quite beautiful. The flowers are really interesting purple-brown. They hang upside down. They remind me a bit of a bat for some reason, and they're not a pleasant odor, and they think they primarily get pollinated by flies and other insects that are attracted to bad smells, let's say. But the fruit themselves are delicious. You'll never find them in the grocery store. They don't travel well. They tend to be ready kind of when they come off in your hand, so you almost have to always be there to check on them. They do have seeds in them, but the flavor I think is great. If you like mangoes, you'd love these. I
was reading about it at the emerging fruit crop section of UCANR, where they take a look at several interesting fruits. And it really sounds like this fruit, to me, as far as marketing goes and shipping goes, it resembles a mulberry in that it doesn't ship very well. It doesn't last very long. So you really need to be on top of it to enjoy it.
Yeah, the skin is quite thin, so I can't imagine that it would hold up for shipping. I can't imagine that you could pick them green like you could some fruits and ship them over long distance. I think it's one of those things where if you're lucky that somebody near you grows one or has, let's say, an orchard. My understanding is they have a commercial orchard at Cornell University. They do a lot of experimenting with. But if you're not going to find one, let's say, maybe at a farmer's market on the East Coast, I'd recommend you try growing one yourself. It's a rather soft fruit, so I guess you spoon it out to eat it? Yes, you can spoon it out. Yeah, that's how I've done it here. And the seeds are quite large. They remind me of like a large kidney bean. Ah. At Kentucky State University, they evaluated some of the cultivars that have come out over the years, and they recommend the NC1, Overlease, Potomac, Shenandoah, Sunflower, Susquehanna, and Wabash. All of those sound familiar. You can usually find there's quite a few retail growers. If you can't find them at your local nursery, there's quite a few retail growers up in Washington and Oregon who ship down here, who do grow pawpaws. And like I said, we have the Susquehanna and the Shenandoah at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center. Have you harvested fruit from them? We have, yes, but it's one of those things you've got to be there when they're ready. And again, there's not a lot of fruit on them. And like we have a problem in Sacramento with squirrels. If you're not on top of them, the squirrels will get them. Yeah, I was reading about it at Kentucky State University, and they talk about a tree, a typical pawpaw tree or shrub will produce about 20 pounds of fruit per tree per year. And if the fruit is 2 pounds, well, that's only 10 pieces of fruit. Yeah, not a lot of fruit. And again, you have to be there when it's ready. And the three main criteria to me are PM shade, rich soil. So definitely an annual circle of compost. And then they do like regular water. They're not a drought tolerant fruit tree.
One thing they did mention in the literature I was reading about it is that because they tend to soften so quickly, they might only last on the shelf 5 to 7 days. But if you put them in the refrigerator, that gets down to about 39, 40 degrees or so, it can be stored for about 3 weeks and maintain good eating quality.
I can see that. That would make sense to me. And my understanding, that's also how you're going to stratify the seedlings if you want to try to grow them. Keep them in the fridge for, I think, approximately 120 days. Don't put them in the freezer. Just keep them in the fridge.
All right. Well, let's talk about pruning, which was Lisa's question, that she thinks she pruned it back way too far. How do you prune the pawpaw?
We just shape them gently in the same way we would a citrus tree. We cut off any dead wood. When you were reading her comments, she said she cut them off at harvest height. So my question is, what is that? Like 2 feet, 6 feet? And then my next question was, because we get this question a lot at the Hort Center. If I have an established tree, the same way that when we plant a bare root fruit tree, we would cut it off at the knee height. So people think you could do that to an established fruit tree, which you can't. So when she says she cuts it off at harvest height, I'm curious as to what height she cut them off. But we don't do drastic pruning on ours at all.
When is the best time to prune a pawpaw?
We do most of our shaping kind of like we do most of our summer pruning at the Hort Center. So we shape it kind of usually in the spring. But we don't, because it's so susceptible to the heat, we don't really want to expose too much of it to the full sun.
Now, she mentioned in her letter that it did send runners out all along the main. Does that mean that there might be trees popping up?
Yeah, when she says runners, so I'm wondering if she means suckers or is she saying that it's sprouting along the main trunk? So either one of those things to me would be a good sign.
Right. I would probably, it depends how many you want, but I would keep one and maybe, how far apart would you space planting pawpaws?
I would say maybe a couple feet because they naturally do form a thicket. So I wouldn't worry about them. Let's say if they were a couple inches apart, I would thin them. That might be also an interesting way to see if you can get all of those suckers to root and then cut them from the parent tree, maybe move them a few feet over.
I noticed that Stark Brothers Nursery sort of agrees with what you're saying. They talk about how light pruning is a good technique for pawpaws, and they say the best time to prune is late winter or early spring when the tree is dormant. And corrective pruning consists of removing broken, interfering, dead, or diseased branches.
Exactly. I don't think this is a tree that has had a long history of being hybridized or cultivated. It's something that would have been cultivated in the wild. So I don't think it's something that would be recommended in the same way that you might prune an apple or pear that's had, let's say, thousands of years of domestication. I think it's a little bit different than that.
And especially since pawpaw fruit is produced on the new growth, annual pruning, light pruning would stimulate that new growth on older trees.
Depending on how old they are and what kind of shape they're in. Yeah, I agree.
All right. So and the pawpaw is almost, it sounds like if some enterprising young farmers decided to grow pawpaws, it sounds like a great fruit for a farmer's market to people to get the pawpaw bug, if you will.
Yes. And I think it's one of those things you'd have to give people a taste. Because people's first response when you say, I should say in North America, Central America, South America, everybody's very familiar with custard apples. They're really delicious. You could get custard apple drinks, custard apple ice cream, custard apple flavored anything. But in the United States, I would say North America, when you say custard apple, most people just look at you with a very confused face, and they don't really know where to go with that when you say, I'd like you to taste one. So if you had samples, I think that would be a great way to get people roped in.
Yes, the pawpaw. And possibly, if you deal with a local nursery this time of year, you might be able to special order some plants.
And then, like I said, there's quite a few. I know at least 2 or 3 retail nurseries that do mail order that are in Oregon and Washington that you could get them from, depending on what they have in stock.
It has a long history. It goes back to 1541. The Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto, and didn't we love the De Soto as a Chrysler product? He reported that Native Americans growing and eating pawpaws are in the Mississippi Valley. Native Americans also use the bark of pawpaw trees to make fishing nets. Daniel Boone and Mark Twain were reported to have been pawpaw fans as well. So it has a long history of popularity among the knowledgeable.
Well, yeah, and I would probably have it has an even longer history with indigenous people in North America.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So the appeal of the pawpaw could be growing if you get a chance to taste it. And those of you that like to experiment with new plants, the pawpaw might be something to try, especially since it can work in USDA zones 5 through 10 as far as cold hardiness goes. As you found out here in rather warm Sacramento County, it probably doesn't like temperatures well over 90.
Especially in the full sun.
Yeah, so afternoon shade definitely is one of those. I am amused at the pollinator for pawpaws. It needs a pollinator as far as an insect to pollinate the plant. And the primary pollinator for pawpaws are flies.
Yeah, it's a really interesting, a very unusual upside down looking flower. It looks, when I first see the petals, I'm not even sure if they're true petals. It reminds me of the corpse flower. It has that same kind of bluish purple, unhealthy look. It has a not very pleasant odor. But the first thing I thought of when I smelled it is, oh, this must be attracting, let's say, flies, yellow jackets. Anything that's attracted to rotting meat would want to find this flower.
I see the University of Kentucky recommends that if you want to commercially plant pawpaws, the recommended density is 295 pawpaw trees per acre. That's a heck of a lot of pawpaw trees.
Yeah, that's like a thicket. Yeah, it's like I said, it's not something that's really been cultivated for centuries. I think you're kind of starting from scratch and you're really learning as you go along how to develop a pawpaw orchard.
And again, pruning, it would be light.
Light.
Right. All right. The other part of Lisa's question that she thinks she was having problems with was pruning her native persimmon tree, not to be confused with the Japanese persimmon, which is one of my favorite fruit trees to grow that we're harvesting this time of the year. But the native persimmon tree is sort of akin to the astringent Japanese persimmon in that you need to let the fruit soften up before you eat it.
Yeah, you can either soften it off the tree, you can wait for a frost, but the longer you keep them on the tree, the more chance somebody's going to take them, meaning squirrels, raccoons, things like that. But you do have to let them get soft before you can use them.
Lisa says the persimmon looked dicey all winter, but came back this year, though it's now sending shoots off the top because of being topped off. There you go, right there. Another vote for pruning by making thinning cuts, not heading cuts.
So we do, again, my question is, where did you cut it off? How thick was the trunk? We have two established persimmons at the Port Center, one Fuyu, which is the crunchy apple type, one Hachia, which is the acorn-shaped one, and those are the Japanese persimmons. We do light heading cuts. Most of our thinning cuts, believe it or not, we do kind of towards the end of the summer when they've sent up quite a few arching branches. We will prune them back because we want to keep them at around 8 to 10 feet. We kind of run the risk a little bit of exposing some of the wood to sunburn, but we specifically grow those two persimmons on the southern side of the large sycamores of the Hort Center to give them afternoon shade.
In my experience with Japanese persimmons, they do respond well to pruning, although there are some sources that say about the American persimmon, the native persimmon, that it does not tolerate heavy pruning very well.
I can see that because that's another one that has not been domesticated. That's another understory tree. And like you said, you need a male and a female. So I can imagine them being sort of scattered, kind of out in the woods, growing without a lot of attention, not needing a lot of pruning, but probably not wanting a lot of pruning either.
Persimmon trees are tough trees, then they will probably bounce back, as Lisa is finding out. The problem I would think with native persimmon trees is fruit production because it can be widely variable from small to a good-sized piece of fruit to no fruit whatsoever, depending on what you have.
Yeah. And then, like you said, you do need a male and a female, unlike the Japanese persimmon. So I'm wondering what she has in her orchard for production of those two types.
Yes. One would hope that there are two varieties within pollination distance of each other to do that. She noted that she removed the broken branches from the persimmon, mainly from raccoons getting at the fruit. And there's another good reason to keep a fruiting tree, no taller than you can reach.
Yes, and we do prop our branches at the Hort Center occasionally when the fruit does get too heavy.
All right, native persimmons. I don't know if I would recommend native persimmons or not, but if you have them, well, you know that they can be a wild tree and can get pretty tall, 60 feet in some instances.
And I've never seen them really offered by any grower here on the West Coast.
Which would indicate maybe it doesn't have heat tolerance here.
Yes, that's another one. You know, if you're going to have that as an understory tree, they're going to have to stay fairly small. If you need both a male and a female, I think now your problems have sort of doubled in terms of how you're going to place them. And I would recommend for the West Coast gardener to stick with the Asian persimmons.
I concur wholeheartedly on that. But if you have native persimmons on your property, then take care of them, and they'll have that bright orange fruit that is common with both the Japanese and the American persimmons.
Yes, easy to see in fall. That's the one good thing about being able to find them.
Plus, they're winter hardy down to USDA Zone 4, and they can tolerate winter temperatures to 25 below zero.
Yeah, anything on the East Coast, I always say it's not the winters that's the problem here. It's the summers.
Consider the soil, too, that our soils tend to run slightly to a lot alkaline, whereas on the East Coast, and there's a lot of acidic soils, and the native persimmon tree prefers a slightly acidic soil.
Yeah, and then we also forget, too, on the East Coast, it's much more humid in the summer, and they get usually regular summer rains, which we never get here.
Penn State University says that American persimmons are slow-growing, and seedling trees may take 4 to 9 years before bearing fruit, so be patient.
I can see that. I can see that if they're growing in the wild, they're preserving their energy for just growth and not fruit production.
And Penn State also says you can train them into a hedge.
That's very interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, well, that's something to think about if you want. All right. Now, speaking of growing unusual fruit, you have an interesting job as a horticulturist. You're a master gardener. You have worked for years and years in retail nurseries, but now you're doing something a little bit different, and it's very intriguing.
So right now I work for an international nonprofit that works for primarily resettling and placing refugees and asylum seekers. And my specific program has to do with community gardening and food security and food access.
And I would think if you're dealing with an international population, you're probably trying to being persuaded to grow some crops you've never heard of.
Yes, and part of the benefit or the joy of my position is we allow the immigrants and refugee and asylum seekers themselves to grow whatever it is that they need to either sell at our markets, to sell at local markets that also have people also from different nations who are looking for specific things that they can't find at regular grocery stores, and they can also grow those for themselves as well.
Is there an internet site where people can get more information?
So nothing that would give detailed information about what we grow, but we do have a farm stand every Saturday in West Sacramento at our farm stand, and it is from 11 to 3 every Saturday. It is, let me get to the address because you caught me off guard.
I know. Take your time.
So the farm is in West Sac. It's 491 Regatta Lane. It's off of Lighthouse Drive. And like I said, it's from 11 to 3 every Saturday. Believe it or not, we still have some really great tomatoes. Everything that we grow there is grown either by us or our immigrant and refugee farmers. And it's a really great place to see some unusual vegetables or just to support your local community.
And what are some of the unusual foods one might find there?
So this time of year, because it's sort of winding down from summer, we have a plant that's called gondana, and some people call it Afghan chive. It's probably our number one seller. Botanically, it's a leek, but it's used a lot in Afghan cuisine. And we just got back from a conference where the 12 different New Roots programs all got together, and it's amazing. We have quite a few plots of gondana, and some of the other growers, let's say in Montana or South Dakota, we're really having a hard time sourcing this vegetable. We also have bottle gourds. That's called oppo by a lot of people. We have bitter melon, amaranth. So a lot of things that you might not see at the regular grocery store. These really specific Nepali hot chili peppers. And again, these are grown by immigrant farmers. These are plants that they're used to, and they grow them both to sell at the market and also to sell to local markets as well.
It sounds like if somebody wants to expand their culinary world, it would be to head to that farmer's market.
It would be, yeah. And like I said, the produce is always changing. We're getting ready for winter. So we're, let's say planting peas, a lot of leafy greens, a lot of root vegetables. But on average, there might be probably at least 50 different vegetables that we're growing there at any certain time. We have sugarcane. I mean, it's a pretty inclusive group of vegetables that we grow there.
All right. We'll have a link with that farm stand location in the show notes. Well, we learned a lot about pruning native persimmons and pawpaw trees, something to expand your horticultural horizons with. Master Gardener Quentyn Young, thanks so much for helping us answer that garden question.
Thanks for having me on, Fred.
Master Gardener Quentyn Young works as an advisor and instructor at the New Roots Farm in West Sacramento, California. It's part of the New Roots program of the International Rescue Committee. They provide refugees and immigrants the opportunity to learn about the business of agriculture in the United States, as well as a place to grow and sell the foods of their native lands. For more information, do an internet search for New Roots Farm Sacramento, or visit rescue.org and type New Roots Farm in the search box at the top of that page. Smart Pots are the original award-winning fabric planter. They're sold worldwide. Smart Pots are proudly made 100% in the USA. Smart Pots are also BPA-free. There's no risk of chemicals leaching into the soil, your herbs, vegetables, and other edibles. That's why organic growers prefer Smart Pots. Smart Pots' breathable fabric creates a healthy root structure for plants. Smart Pots come in a wide array of sizes, and they can be reused year after year. Speaking of the cold weather that's on the way, if a frost or freeze is in the forecast, moving your frost-tender plants that are in the Smart Pots that have handles makes them even easier to move closer to the house for added warmth, or you could even move them inside for the winter. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information about the complete line of Smart Pots lightweight fabric containers. It's Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planter. Go to smartpots.com/Fred for more info and that special Farmer Fred discount on your next Smart Pot purchase. Go to smartpots.com/Fred. Santa is coming early to nurseries in California and soon will be arriving at nurseries throughout the United States. As the weather warms up back east and in the Midwest, you're going to see more and more fruit trees, berries, nuts, vines, plenty of edible crops for you to be planting in your garden. And as I said, California gardeners have sort of a head start on it right now, as Dave Wilson Nursery is delivering vines and berries and a few fruit and nut varieties to California nurseries. What's in? What's good? Let's find out. We're talking with Phil Pursel from Dave Wilson Nursery. Phil, I was at the nursery the other day, and I noticed a lot of Dave Wilson product had just arrived. There were blueberries, blackberries, raspberries. I think I saw kiwi. There were olives. There were pomegranates. There's a lot coming in.
Yeah, so what we do is we have two basic programs. We have a small fruit program that we put into 4x9 inch liner sleeves. And then we have our traditional bare root program, which is our standard fruit trees. So we ship the farm market program early so that it kind of gets the nurseries in the mood to, get the edibles thought out to the consumer. And at the same time, they tend to make nice little early Christmas gifts for people to pick up. And that kind of is the intro to, our big bare root season, where we send all of our fruit trees for the year.
There has been a big change in the way that the product is being delivered. Now, when you said bare root, old timers might think, oh, yeah, the trees are plunged into a bed of sawdust in the back of the nursery. Well, not so much anymore. It seems like most berry plants and others are coming already in containers.
Yeah. We've done market studies, and the demographics has just changed, where the younger consumer of fruit trees, they're just more comfortable with trees and berries and such in pots. They just feel a little bit more safer. We still grow our fruit trees as a basic bare root. And kind of give you a little background is that we field grow our trees, and then we have just finished harvesting our trees, where we have a digger, digs the trees up. We plant our trees about 4 or 5 inches on center. And when these trees come out of the ground, it's just a dormant top and bare root. We grade everything out, and then we bundle them. Then we ship them to our retailers. The retailers now, instead of just plopping that tree out of the sawdust bin, and some of them still do that and selling them, a lot of them have gone into just going ahead and potting them. A very popular way of doing it is putting them into a pulp pot, which is biodegradable. It's just a way to get the plants out for the newer gardener who's not quite comfortable with just seeing a tree, a stick, and bare root and not knowing what to do with it.
What do they do with the pulp pot when they get it home?
So what they do is, the nice thing about the pulp pot, as opposed to a bare root, if you get a bare root tree, you need to plant it that day. With a pulp pot, it allows you to go ahead and prepare the soil and such, and you can wait till, you can plant it right now, or you can plant it in the spring. But you plant the tree in the pulp pot. It's made out of a paper product, pressed paper. So you can plant that tree in this pulp pot like you would a normal plant. And after about 6 months, the pulp pot itself will disintegrate, and the roots will keep on growing into the soil. So it just gives you a little bit more options of when to plant that tree.
Can you help out that pulp pot to break down by perhaps soaking it before planting?
Yeah, there's different ways of doing it. And actually, if you were to get a tree right now that is in a pulp pot, you can just pop it right out of the pulp pot and plant it in the ground as a regular bare root. But like I said, if you want to hold on to it, different ways of doing it is, like you said, soak in the pulp pot. We always suggest scoring the sides of the pulp pot in the bottom with like a utility knife to kind of help open things up a little bit to help the process of breaking down.
And so why is it that it would be advisable to plant it in the pulp pot if you've been holding on to it for weeks or months? Is there something about the root structure inside?
Yes. So what happens with the pulp pot is that it acts almost like a plastic container. If you don't have time to plant the tree right away, as the weather starts warming up, let's say you wait, from the time you get the tree, and you can't plant it for a month. If you just get it out of the sawdust, it's already starting to send out feeder roots that can be damaged if you try to plant it as a traditional bare root. So by planting it in this pulp pot, it allows the plant to start rooting out within the soil of the pulp pot without disturbing it. It really minimizes the possibility of that tree crashing and not taking off.
So with the pulp pot, it's sort of a little bit of insulation to help it get established in its new home. And then,
Exactly.
As the winter rains come or you're irrigating, that pulp pot breaks down and the roots go out and you've got yourself a healthy tree. How deep should you plant that tree?
Generally speaking, when you will buy a plant in a pulp pot, the nursery will have it planted at the level where we took it out of the ground. So it'll be, you'll see where the soil is. When you plant that tree into the ground, you want to make sure that you do not plant the tree in the pulp pot deeper than the soil level that is in that pulp pot. In fact, we always like people to kind of elevate the pulp pot a little bit so that it's, half an inch above your normal ground level. So any type of settling you'll pretty much be pulp pot level soil, and your ground level will be about even.
How do you get water inside that pulp pot then if you've just planted it all into the garden? Is there a lip around that pulp pot that you can cut off to perhaps make it easier for the water to flow into that area?
Yeah, so what I like to do, and there's different methods, is that when you plant the pulp pot, I like leaving the pulp pot lip exposed, for the first few months. And when you water inside the pulp pot, just like watering in a pot, but then you also water on the outside of the pulp pot equally. And what that will do is it helps the water transpire from one to the other, so you don't get a stuck type of plant by watering inside the pulp pot and then watering outside the pulp pot. And this actually helps speed up the breakdown of that lip. By the summertime, that lip is just going to pop right off. It's going to, it will have disintegrated.
Now, for those nurseries that still have true bare root, they do have their fruit trees, their bare root fruit trees plunged into a bed of sawdust. Now, one strategy we used to employ when we got those home would be to immediately plunge it into either a bucket of water, a big bucket of water, or if you've got a blank garden space, what's called healing it in, basically just sort of digging a shallow hole and getting the root zone buried in the garden soil temporarily until you decide to move it.
Yes. The water part is, we always suggest when you get ready to plant the true bare root tree, is that you want to really soak the root so you hydrate everything. Let's say you bring it back from the nursery, and, they'll wrap it in, some plastic and a little bit of sawdust. If you let it sit there, odds are it's going to dry out a little bit. And the one thing you don't want to do with the true bare root tree is to have the roots dry out. So soaking it, hydrating the roots are, something that's recommended. Now, if you got a true bare root tree, and let's say you buy it, on a Friday, and you really can't get to it till Sunday, then healing in is a process where you just cover the roots with soil. Even if it's, some soil that you're going to be planting the tree with, or if you have like a little planting bed that you can just go ahead and dig the tree into. But you want to make sure that it has some sort of type of soil covering until you're ready to plant it. And then at that point, we still recommend soaking in water before you go ahead and plant it into the hole.
Find the Fruit Tube videos at davewilson.com. Phil and Tom have all sorts of great videos there on fruit trees and the berry plants.
Yes. I mean, we have a pretty in-depth library on the harvesting of the trees, how to plant a fruit tree, how to prune a fruit tree, the concept of our backyard orchard culture. These videos, we want the homeowner to feel comfortable on planting their own orchard or having an edible garden, because it really isn't difficult if you follow just a few basic steps. So on these videos, it's all tutorial, and we try to make it as user-friendly as possible.
And including, there's a wonderful chart there, a harvest chart, and all the various Dave Wilson Nursery berries and fruit trees are listed by dates of relative harvest. And even though this calendar applies to California, if you live down south or back east, you can sort of get a good idea of what's early and what's late.
What people really don't realize is that the commercial farmer, he's all about making sure that he has fruit throughout the whole season. And you can do the exact same thing at your house. You don't want all the fruit to come on, at the end of June. And then the rest of summer, you don't have anything producing. So by using this harvest chart, it's a guide so you can kind of look at, well, do I want a peach in July? Do I want a pluot in August? It's a good planning tool.
Visit davewilson.com for a whole host of very good, accurate information about growing fruit, vines, and nuts, no matter where you live, wherever Dave Wilson product can be found, which is most of the United States. Phil Pursel, we learned a lot today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
I know that most of you have a favorite podcast player that you use to listen to the Garden Basics podcast as well as other podcasts. One of the most popular podcast players belongs to Spotify. And according to Spotify, the most listened to episode of the Garden Basics podcast in 2023 was episode 279, which was entitled Fall Gardening Basics. The cool seasons of fall and winter, that's the best time of the year to grow some of the healthiest, most nutritious vegetables around, especially in milder areas of the country. But how do you start? That was the question tackled by myself and America's favorite retired college horticultural professor, Debbie Flower. It was a question from a college student who wanted to try to grow a fall and winter garden for the first time. If you missed it, give it a listen. It's our flashback episode of the week, episode 279, originally aired last August. It's entitled Fall Gardening Basics. Find a link to it in today's show notes or at the podcast player of your choice. And you can find it as well, along with a transcript, at our homepage, gardenbasics.net. Time for a quick tip here on Garden Basics. Now, those of you that live in USDA Zone 9 probably are very familiar with protecting tender plants from frost. Maybe you're using frost cloths. Maybe you're being sure to make sure that the soil is moist to save off the effects of a frost. Maybe you're stringing Christmas lights in your citrus trees in order to add a few degrees of protection. The big old C7 or C8 or C9 bulbs that actually have some heat to them. That's always a good idea. But then you could go to a nursery and buy a spray to put on those plants that will allegedly protect your plants from freezing. Is that a fact? Well, it just so happens that retired college horticultural professor Debbie Flower once upon a time took part in a study to determine if that was so or not. But I think in your study, Debbie, didn't you do it on conifers?
Yes, the study was funded as studies at colleges. I was working at a cooperative extension office, and they get funding from many places, and one is industry. And this was a study funded by industry that mailed Christmas decorations to people who ordered them. So it was a Pacific Northwest company, and lots of conifers up there, Doug fir and cedars, and many I'm sure grown specifically for this industry, which would be clipped and packaged up and mailed to your house if you ordered them, so that you can decorate your home with the lovely smelling real greens of Christmas. And so we treated the cuttings that had come off the plant we had collected on our own site, and then mailed them to ourselves to see which treatment worked best, so that when the cuttings, the plant pieces, arrived back to us, they were in the best shape possible. I can't tell you what worked the best. I don't remember the specific details of that study, and the answers went to the industry that does it on a regular basis. But I can tell you that I also participated in some other studies with the same sort of material that was sprayed on those conifers, and holly would be another one, a broadleaf evergreen, that were shipped in the mail. But we did it on plants that were alive and were in containers. And then we checked their respiration rate and transpiration rate. So we're getting into some big words here. The plant is alive and it has to breathe. It has to absorb air, and it has to get rid of the air, the parts of the air it doesn't need. And a lot of that exchange of gases occurs in the leaves or needles. Needles do the job for a conifer. And they're often on the back, but sometimes on the top of the leaf as well. And if they're called stoma or stomata, and if those openings get clogged, then that exchange of air cannot occur. And that's what we saw. So we sprayed the plants that are alive with the commercial frost preventative sprays. Then we measured we had already done it once, measured their ability to exchange gases with the atmosphere, and it went way down. And it also increased, the other thing we noticed that was increased by the sprays on the plant was loss of moisture from the plant. In order to understand that, you need to understand the concept of osmosis. Osmosis is when water moves from an area of high water concentration to an area of low water concentration, and it goes through a semi-permeable membrane. If you make coffee or tea in the morning, you're using osmosis. The water goes into the coffee or tea and then moves out and makes the drink that you get to drink. In a plant, it happens from cell to cell and many other places in the plant. But what we noticed was when the chemical that is used to supposedly prevent the plant from wilting due to frost is on the plant, just one layer of it. It sets up an osmotic water exchange where the water inside the plant, which is at high concentration, moves through what is now a semi-permeable membrane, which is the spray that was just applied to the plant, out into the environment. So it actually increased the loss of water from the plant and caused wilting to occur sooner. We also did the experiment with multiple layers of the spray. That changed the water situation, still clogged the pores, still stopped the gas exchange, but the loss of water did not occur. And our speculation was that it was because we just coated the whole plant with so much waxy stuff, so much of the chemical, that the water couldn't come out at all.
What was the reasoning behind the industry to come up with this stuff in the first place? It basically is a coating. It's a polymer coating that allegedly protects plants. It staves off the effects of a frost or a freeze. It offers a few degrees of protection. So I would imagine a lot of people are thinking as they're applying it, oh, this will make the plant warmer. It doesn't make the plant warmer, though, does it?
No, it doesn't make the plant warmer. And it doesn't even, as far as I know, allow the plant to hold on to any warmth that it has. So I really don't know. Lots of things. There are lots and lots of things. I had a professor who had a whole file of them, advertisements for things in horticulture that were just somebody's idea, but they actually make no sense. Products that come to market that people try to sell you. Now it would be on the internet, probably, and it used to be in magazines. They say it can do one thing really well, and maybe that's true, but there are other consequences in many cases.
Sounds like vitamin B1.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yes. There have been studies on that too.
We'll save that for another time. Yes. Come planting time, we'll bring up vitamin B1 and how you're better off just leaving them in those Flintstone tablets. Well, we learned something new, that if you want to protect your plants, your tender plants, from a frost or a freeze, especially your citrus and USDA Zones 9, you're better off using a frost cloth. You're better off watering the soil thoroughly to help stave off the effects of a frost. You're better off stringing warm lights in there as well to stave off the effects of a frost.
Right. Add heat, trap heat, or mix the air. In case you've got a local friend with a helicopter, they can fly over your house and mix the air.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing you could do is you could set up a big fan outside and blow it around your plant, and that might help, but I don't think so.
No, you need to bring the air from above back down to the earth. Yeah.
Once again, we've learned a lot here on the Garden Basics podcast. Thank you, Debbie Flower.
My pleasure, Fred.
The Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast comes out once a week on Fridays, and it's brought to you by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. The Garden Basics podcast is available wherever podcasts are handed out, and that includes our homepage, gardenbasics.net, and that's where you can also find transcripts of most episodes as well. Thank you so much for listening or reading.